Good evening, everybody.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
Good to see everyone made it for the Sabbath tonight.
Glad.
And I just want to tell our viewers that we're going to have a little different format. We're going to start out after the joke. We're going to start out right into the topic. So we're going to try that for a couple of weeks, see how that works, and if everybody's good with that, we may stick with it. So,
And
all
we'll
right.
we'll get to the news and prophecy at the end of the program.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this particular joke is called The Hikers. Um, One day, Joe, Bob, and Dave were hiking in the wilderness area when they came upon a large, raging, violent river. They needed to get on the other side, but had no idea how to do so. So, being very religious men, um, Joe prayed to God, saying, "Please, God, give me the strength to cross the river." Poof! God gave him big, strong arms and legs. He was able to swim across the river in 2 hours against the current, although he almost drowned a couple of times, but he fought his way through and made it. Ha, ha, ha. Seeing this, Dave prayed to God, saying, "Please, God, give me the strength and the tools to cross the river." Poof! God gave him a rowboat, and he was able to row his way in about an hour, half the time. He almost capsized once or twice, but he made it. Bob had seen how it worked out for the other two, so he also prayed to God. He said, "God, please give me the strength, the tools, and the intelligence to cross this river." Poof! God turned him into a woman. He looked at the map, walked up 100 yards, and crossed the bridge.
I bet I know where you got that one from.
That was a little unfair.
Yes. Yes.
Well, men don't want to look at the map. I can figure it out. Or, not everybody, but sometimes when it comes to reading directions, some men say, "I really need to read all those directions. I can figure it out."
You know, I'm down in the southeast. I'm down in the southeast, and you said Joe, Bob, and Dave. I thought it was two of them.
Yeah.
Here's another corny one. This is short and corny. A minister and a lawyer are talking together, and the lawyer says to the minister, "Well, what do you do when you make a minor mistake? Or you make a mistake?" And the minister asked the lawyer, "What do you do to make a mistake?" The lawyer said, "Well, if I make a major mistake, I try to go back into the legal system, the court system, and correct it. But if it's a minor mistake, I just let it go." And the lawyer said to the minister, "Well, what do you do?" The minister, "I do the same thing. I let it go." He said, "Well, give me an example of a minister making a minor mistake." He said, "Well, I was preaching the other day, and I meant to say Satan is the father of all lies, but I ended up saying lawyers are the father of all lies. It's so minor. What's the difference?" Now I'll get sued tomorrow. Well, although they say if you're in trouble, get yourself a good. I'm not making this up. That's what people say for years. Get yourself a good Jewish lawyer. Okay. The theme for today is Absalom, the spoiled, vain anti-hero of the Bible. We're talking about heroes. This is an anti-hero, kind of what not to do. And actually, I think it's also a little bit of a criticism of David for being a bad, indulging parent. Now, some translations are a little hard to get this out of, but others are easier. If you go to 2 Samuel 13:21 and 22, it basically says Samuel was aware of the horrible rape that Amnon made of his half-sister, and he was mad about it, but he didn't discipline his son Amnon. He did nothing about it. Doesn't that sound like an indulgent parent? And the whole context for these boys, they do bad stuff, but David doesn't really discipline them like he should, including murder, which obviously that's as David's also the government. That's an important thing. That's let somebody get away with that is really indulgent. But I was just thinking, it's easy to say, parents, raise your kids to stay on the straight and narrow, but it's really hard to do.
Do you think that David?
Go ahead, Dave.
Do you think that David was maybe older and looking back at some of the things he had done in his life and repentant and heartbroken, and just at that point did not question himself? He didn't know how hard to punish, and if he was just, I don't know what to do. When he looks back and considers Bathsheba and Uriah and cutting the coat off of Saul and all the things he did. I wonder if he was looking back on his life and was real sentimental and just didn't know how to act at that point, being repentant of the things he had done.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing when you were saying that about like Bathsheba. After that, I mean, how do you fault people once you've done much worse? Well, maybe not, but you can see how it'd be difficult for him to do that. But and it's next in the same sense. I mean, he has to know that the country, his people, saw that he went easy on his children like that. When it would have been them that did it, he would have, sentenced them to death maybe. But it had to be a little bit of especially the people close to him, had to be a little bit iffy to see that.
Yeah. And the one thing that has been said by many people, I think Dave Antion said it well, he's seen many, many parents, sometimes good parents, when their kids get bigger, 16, 17, 18, they go bad no matter what you do. And he's seen bad parents, really alcoholed out, zonked out. The kid, when he gets 14, 15, 16, decides, I'm not going to do that, and he goes on the straight and narrow. So in other words, kids are sort of like us with God. We have our own individual free moral agency.
I know a couple of men. One's mother was a meth addict, and I can assume what else. One day he said, I've never been in jail other than to go bail my mom out. And the other one, his mother was a bad drug addict and a prostitute, and it was terrible. And both of these men are good men. They read their Bible and have a working knowledge of it, and I don't know to what point they act on it, but they're good men and decent men because they saw the evil and they said, no, that's not going to get me like it did my family. The one, both of them are very accomplished in what they do. The one guy is a very accomplished man, and and he told me, he says, I understand what it is. He says, but I also understand that I've got to forgive my family, otherwise there's no forgiveness for me. He says, however, I don't hate them or whatever, and I'm just numb to it at this point. But the only way that I can survive is forgiveness, and then look at myself and be my own person. And I think that happens sometimes. Kids take a look at rotten parents and go, wow, they stay in trouble. I'm not going to be like that. So sometimes a bad example is almost a good example. And then you have the other guy that he nurtures his kid, but society gets him, or the school gets him, or the coach gets him, or television gets him. And no matter what you do, that or another family member that just doesn't agree with the church and the way you raise your children, gets that kid to pull away, and next thing you know, the kid's, he or she has made tons and tons of mistakes.
Yeah, but the examples we set, hopefully when they get older, hopefully they come back, and hopefully they see, hey, especially if we are living close to the end times, they're going to see all this stuff that they've heard about all their lives, and the chances are pretty good, I think, that unless their hearts are just rock hard, that they're going to come back, and they're going to say, hey, what my parents were doing was correct, and I want to learn more about it. I I want to get right with, God, and get back on the right path. That's what if they don't stay in the church, that's what we have. We have that. We show them examples just like we're supposed to be showing everybody else examples, and hope that they come back.
Well, it says if you raise up your children in the way of the Lord, they'll not turn from it when they're old and gray. But sometime before they're old and gray, they maybe give you a hard time. And
Right.
you know, gotta look at the prodigal son. When he was working and saw his son coming from afar, he stopped what he was doing and ran to meet him.
Yep.
You know, and that's how we've got to be as parents, as Christians.
Yeah, and
Right.
like Ken was saying, the best thing we can do is set as good example as we can.
Right. And Absalom went too far, too fast, and that's what caused his problem. He went too deep, you know, too far off the deep end.
A lot of times that's generational too. You know, if you can teach your children to get that, to understand it, they're much more likely to teach their children, and it'll go on from generation to generation. On the other hand, the children that grow up with no guidance, no parenting, aren't very likely to get it. You know, and their kids will come along and be the same way. I see them when they come into the store where I work. I saw a couple come in with 3 kids, and the minute they got inside the store, the 3 kids went off in different directions. And I could hear them hollering and taking things off the shelf, and once in a while something will break. And they just let them run wild. They don't round them up when they're ready to leave.
I know that my son.
Walmart at night, not during the day, but at certain late hours at night, the parents who bring their kids in are the ones that run wild. I'm sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. I noticed my son as a teenager, he said some things that were way out left field and liberal and stuff that I would never have. And I almost think he was just testing me to see how I'd respond to him saying something so stupid. But then he had daughters. And that all changed.
Real quick. Let me tell you.
You learn quickly, right? Speaking of kids, I've noticed, looking at the grandkids, the media grabs them early. There are certain video game sites, and I will probably get the names wrong, so I'm going to give them different things where they get into a story, and they kind of build a world, and little kids are on it. Not used to be just big kids. One is called Minecraft, and I'm thinking they're being influenced at a younger and younger age, and that's kind of scary.
These animation films, then these Ice Age is one of them. Then they had a commercial that had the Ice Age characters on it talking about adoption, and 2 of the Ice Age characters are male, and it says your mommies or daddies don't have to be perfect to make a home. CBS Family has a program called The Fosters, where there's 2 open homosexual 13-year-old boys on the program. So you think it's family, you let your kids watch it. You're in the kitchen getting dinner ready. Dad's coming home from work. Now he comes in, where's dinner? And he's all going to be on the table in a minute. And he gets out of his work clothes. Meanwhile, the kids are watching this, and they're being influenced at 7 years old.
And when I think about David, let's put ourselves in David's kids. Being royal kids, they would be treated special. So they'd already have a little bit of a vanity, just being royalty. You just look at the royal family in England, gives you some idea. And then David, they probably were very cute kids, knowing David, what we can see. They probably were very cute and charming, and he indulged them and spoiled them to make it even worse. And I think, like I said, I think I read it, 2 Samuel 13, 21 and 22 says that David refused, some translators refused to discipline him. Then when you go to I'm moving to the second, the danger of vanity and beauty. When you go to 2 Samuel 14, 25, 14, I want to read this. Now put yourself in Absalom's shoes. Consider he's a very spoiled kid his whole life. Now he's grown up, but being spoiled. You know, he's a royal prince. You know, now in all Israel there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his good looks. Since it's in the Bible, we have to presume it's true. It wasn't like somebody just said it because they wanted to. In other words, he might have been the best-looking man in the whole nation, because the Bible says it so. For his good looks, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. You know, David was a very good-looking man. It's logical that he probably married some good-looking women. It's, you know, genetically speaking, it's very possible. And when he cut the hair of his head, at the end of every year he cut it, because it was heavy on him. When he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels according to the king's standards. Now, you imagine all this hair probably piled up. Maybe I'm wanting to talk about it, but no hair. Piled up real high, like a gigantic cone on his head. All this hair. There was even a model years ago, male model, had long hair. I can't remember his name. Fabio.
Yeah.
Don't you get a Fabio feel when you hear this description?
Yep.
Well, and the odd thing is, his hair is what got him killed in the end. We'll get to that story in a minute. But there's some irony in all that. And then you think about he's good looking. Now, and then you look at Ezekiel 28:17. I'll just read it. I know most people know these. They're not, scriptures we're all familiar with, but 28:17 says, and it's speaking about the cherub, Lucifer. Lucifer 28:17 Ezekiel. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Since the Bible said he was beautiful, he was beautiful. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor, because he was splendiferous, and however he looked. And then he got cast to the grounds before kings, and Satan got kicked out of the heavenly throne. And then some of it is dual. Some goes back to the king of Tyre, but it's clear it's talking about Satan. Can you see that if you're an exceptionally beautiful person and you get praised on your beauty all the time, that is going to be a character challenge to you.
Look at are these the movie stars, the ladies in particular that are so beautiful. I don't know if I should say. I went to a thing one time, it was a motivational speech, and they had a lady come out who's considered beautiful, and she's a singer, and she was going to give a speech, and the speech was so silly. She talked about take chances, like make your hair like my hair, and that was her. She's talking to businessmen, and it was make your hair look like my hair, dye your hair a bright color. This was not a motivational speech that I think most businessmen would understand. And she was caught up in her looks and I guess her talent so much that she really had nothing to say.
You mean she was beautiful but shallow?
Yeah, I guess that's the way to put it. I mean, she just didn't bring anything. You're listening to people talk that were a governor or a sports figure or a Zig Ziglar type motivational person with a formula to help you. And then she just came out and said, "Just be beautiful," and played with her hair. And were you there for that? No. And she said, look, I dyed my hair a new color. It helps me to motivate. And she was telling these business guys, what you need to do is dye your hair and maybe buy a pretty dress. And
that really helped me.
It wasn't helpful to anyone. People started getting up and going and getting something to drink.
This is we're talking about human nature here, and I think everybody's got some of it, a little bit. I think we all do. But I can remember even going back all the way to high school, the most popular kids would form a little group, and they were the trendy ones, and they didn't want to talk to the rest of us, And but when I see them now, it seems like they were the first ones to really grow old.
The odd thing, I saw this study somewhere, and I don't remember the details. Kids who were very, very popular in high school were less likely to be successful than those who were not. If that study is accurate, I'll just say if it was accurate. That may also show the problem of being praised for beauty may be bad for your character in ways that will show up years later.
I think that's likely.
Well, if you go back to David too, he had money. So did he actually raise his children, or did he have nannies and educators and tutors? And I have a friend who was at every football game his son played and that kind of thing. But the kid had every kind of footwork tutor and running coach and diet coach, and the kid's first car was a Mercedes, and he totaled it, but he didn't care. And this kid so far has accomplished nothing. Still lives at home in his 20s. And his father is following our youngest son, who, the same age, which we don't feed him. Well, we fed him Monday because he came by for dinner. Best dinner I ever had, too, by the way. But he, we don't, if he needs something, we offer, but he never wants to take it. And we told him, listen, there's fruit out there, but you got to go pick it. I'm picking my own fruit. You got to go pick your own fruit. Well, maybe David had these nannies and people that coddled these kids so much and took care of them so much because he was so busy being the king that their influence could have been, who knows?
Yeah. Plus, how many children did he have? Do we have an accurate count? I mean,
I don't think we do, but he had a number of them. I know a number of boys, at least 4 boys are mentioned. I don't know if they tell you about all the daughters, but so he had a number. One is David was at war a lot. He conquered all the nations all the way around. So he was probably in the field away from home a fair amount of the time, just like you said, David. But think if you're a nanny of someone as popular and famous as David, you're going to probably treat that kid too special, don't you think?
Yep, absolutely. You're not gonna. There's no incentive for you to discipline them because they'll just run to daddy or run to mommy or what have you. You have no incentive to do it. You have only incentive to kind of sweep it under the rug, let it get by, and keep your job and keep moving on. That's the problem. That's what they face.
There's an accurate name for that. They call it spoiling them.
Yeah. Like, for instance, if somebody comes to you and they flatter you, now the difference between flattery and a compliment is honest, and flattery is manipulation. They come and they flatter you. You realize they're not doing you a favor. They're setting you up. You're the best looking, you're so distinguished looking, and you just look so good in your suit and whatever other kind of flattery they give you. That's bad for you. But there's something else occurred to me. If you flatter your kids by telling them how cute they are all the time, you got to do some of that. I understand, you hug the kids. But I wonder, is that really good for them? Hear too much of that.
You got to learn how to handle failure. That's one of the things that a lot of the sports things now. You're going to get a trophy if you show up. And I tell the parents when they bring their kids to me for the class, I tell them if it was absolutely terrible, I'm going to tell them it's absolutely terrible, and then we're going to make it better. And I do it in a nice way. I start laughing. I go, I'm going to be honest, that was terrible. That was absolutely terrible. Get over here and try that again, because I know you can do better. But when they do something terrific, I go, pound for pound, you're the best in town. But when they do something terrible, I go, stop. That was stinky, and I get them back up there, and I make them do it right because they start feeling the accomplishment of working and realizing that they're not perfect. And some of these people that I've met who have tons of money that don't really raise their kids, the kids just expect everything to be handed to them. They have no idea what failure is about.
Yeah.
By the way, David had 19 sons and 1 daughter. But boy, you're right about that. A good coach pushes people to do better. And
we as ministry should do the same with our people. We should, tell them, listen, we all have problems. I'm not talking down to nobody. I'm the worst guy in the room probably. But we got to band together as a family as times become near. And we cannot have any of this arrogance or any of this self-pride or whatever. We got to look in the mirror and work together as a spiritual family, and all of us keep trying to overcome, because you're only as strong as your weakest link. And I think King David found out his family was only as strong as the weakest link. You can only imagine.
Wolves in the church, so when they get to that point.
And one thing to remember, we can get vain because we know things the average person doesn't know. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians 1:26-29, he said, not many of the great or mighty are called. So we're not the top people, but we know things they don't know because God has opened our minds. We can get vain about that, and you can get vain about almost anything. And so I believe vanity, if that brought the devil down, it's a danger to everybody. Because you could look at it this way. Absalom, if it weren't for his vanity, he could have stayed a rich prince in in Israel, his entire life, living the royal life of fun, happiness, whatever, being famous. He could have lived that all his life, all the perks, but his vanity got the best of him, And I want to mention vanity-driven ambition is dangerous. Um, um, if we were to go to Acts 20, let me just find Acts 20, verse 29 real quick, because it's a danger for people in the church who are leading. You don't have to be an elder to be a leading person. I know a man, this goes back in a southern city, and I won't try to be careful not to mention names. Nobody knows who he's talking about, but I guess he and his wife had a lot of influence over another couple, and he got his own little, I called it wedge doctrine. You pick up some wedge. So and now, the four of them meet in his living room, and he got his own little group. But obviously with elders, it's even a bigger temptation. Here's what Paul said in Acts 20, verse 29. These are the Ephesian elders. Probably the last time they would see him, likely. So, what a warm, sincere moment this was. He says in verse 29, Acts 24, I know this, that after my departure, after Paul left places, the Judaizers and the spiritual wolves, they couldn't get away with it when Paul was there. When Paul left, they descended. Anyway, for I know this, that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. But here's a part that I think we need to worry about, verse 30. Also from among yourselves, men will rise up, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after themselves. They want a personal following. And can you see the vanity in that? Well, yeah, I've been a part of this organization, but I want to get my own personal following, and I deserve it. And so, they like me more than anybody, and this other couple likes them. I can put together 6, 7 people that'll, when I leave, they'll go with me.
I got two things. One we talked about last Sabbath in our local group, and the other is the mentality like that. Because you remember when Saddam Hussein in the Gulf War realized he was losing, he said, "Burn all the oil wells. If I can't have it and have my way, nobody can have it." And that's the mind of Satan right there. That's an attitude and personality found in Satan. But I can see also in the church, and I'm going to go off a little bit here, hopefully not too much. The day is coming that we won't be allowed to have meetings and do these things, and we won't be allowed to gather together. And I could see when possibly there's one world church and a lot of the other organizations go to that world church and look to that one leader as their leader, people like us that won't go for that won't do it. We may not be on the radar, but somebody who felt like they didn't get the respect they deserved, or they didn't get put to the position they deserved. Maybe somebody in a similar group to ours, maybe somebody in our own family will say, you know what, I'm going to turn them into the authorities. I'm going to become this thorn in their side. And they'll find a DVD that one of us, someone in the ministry has put out where they use some terminology that maybe is not politically correct. And then they're going to come after us, all because of one person's little ego got hurt. All because he didn't get ordained when he needed to, or he wasn't given the flock he wanted to have, or whatever. It could be anything. They didn't recognize my greatness, and therefore, if I can't have it, I'll bring them down.
Let me tell the story. It happened this past year. It's why I mentioned the vanity-driven missions. It's in the past year. I'm going to try not to mention names and locations. Nobody will know who I'm talking about. It's not my local area, but it's out there somewhere in America. There's a spiritual wolf who for years has been trying to recruit our people. I won't go into the background. I warned this guy about him, but he just recently really pulled him away completely, with the promise, probably, or the implication that you go with me and you'll get ordained. Well, I was talking to this guy, we're trying to prevent somebody else from getting pulled away with him, and who knows him well. It's an older church member, knows this guy very well. He said this man was an easy mark. I said, why was he an easy mark for the spiritual wolf to get? He said, because he has vanity and he has a lot of ambition. All they had to do, this spiritual, was appeal to his ambition and vanity, and he was hooked, like hooking a fish. I thought, yeah. After the older guy who knew him well, I said, yeah, you're right. He said, it tried to get me, but I don't have that kind of vanity and ambition. And of course he doesn't. He's a real, solid person spiritually. I said, yeah, I could see it.
Years ago, and I mean a long time ago, somebody came to me and asked me if I would leave this group, that they would ordain me to something. And I said, no, I'm not interested in that. I got enough on my plate. And so they sent an email out. Apparently they thought it was to me, but it was to my father. And he sent them back like a 7 or 9 page email telling them where they were wrong and really put them in their place. And everybody just come to me going, man, I read that email you wrote. I didn't write it. But he put them in their place and nobody went with them. He tore them up.
Have you ran into the types that will come to you and tell you that the Armstrongs were good, but they were incomplete and that they didn't have it all? And if this particular person has studied farther, and lo and behold, they now have discovered things, know things that the Armstrongs never knew, never taught, and therefore they are set aside, a step above, and that's why we should follow them.
We had a guy who, he looked really terrible appearance-wise, and he came to my house with this tummy sticking out, really looked bad. He says to me, he says, now God's going to send you somebody you wouldn't think of listening to, like me, which is, of course, what I was thinking. He says, but I am actually a prophet. And to back that up, about 2 years later, he got his own website, and it said, I'm trying to be careful not to mention this guy's name, get in trouble, so-and-so, so-and-so, prophet of God. Of course, he left our group after a year or two. To my knowledge, nobody went with him. He went out of town and bounced around here and there, but somebody told me they saw a website of him, this goes back a few years, that said he was a prophet. Got it in writing now somewhere. And now some people border on, their ambition and vanity borders on mental illness. So maybe that may be a different kind of vanity. But if you get that kind of vanity and ambition together, you're an easy mark to be reeled in by Satan and his minions.
Yeah, we had a member that I think he intelligence. I think he thought he was smarter than everybody else, and that's why I think his vanity for his intelligence is what drew him right out of the church.
I've seen that too. That intellectual or biblical-lectual vanity.
Exactly. I think he thought he was, I think he studied himself, and he thought he was, studied himself right out, because I think he thought he was, he had figured something out. He was smart.
Years ago, I was looking at one of the websites from some other group or whatever, and it said, here now introducing, or I'm paraphrasing this really bad, but minister of ministers, evangelist of evangelists, and prophet of all these, and I'm thinking, wow, who is this guy? It kept going on and on, preacher of preachers,
The most holy, high, right reverend, never mind. By the way, the key part in Absalom's story, going back to 2 Samuel 16:23, I want to read this description of the key advisor who left David to go to Absalom. The question is, why did he do that? But I'll talk about that in a minute. Now the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was as if one had inquired at the oracle of God. So was all the advice Ahithophel gave both David and Absalom. So this guy is wise beyond belief. And matter of fact, David sent a double agent, Hushai, to counter his advice, because David knew that Ahithophel's advice would guarantee Absalom victory. Now, I'm just going to move the story up. The only chance Absalom had to really replace David as king, you all know the story. He undermined David for years, with the people before they got to the courthouse. He'd say, "Oh, if I was only king, I'd rule in your favor." And he's very charming, and he wouldn't have people bow to him. He's, "Oh, I'm just like you." By the way, that's a propaganda technique called playing folks, where the big, powerful politician has people, TV cameras, show him carrying his own bags. You know, when the camera's not on, that's not happening, but it's a propaganda technique. They've developed it. But he had his own, probably intuitive version of it. So he undermined David. And I thought to myself, surely some of David's advisors probably told him once or twice what's going on. And David probably loved his son so much, he said, I don't want to believe it. I don't want to hear anything bad about Absalom. He may have some problems, but deep down he's a good boy. And so they probably stopped telling David. And then when he undermined David, David didn't want to make a fight in the city of Jerusalem, so David left. The only chance Absalom had was the advice that Ahithophel gave him, which is, he said, give me 15,000 of the troops we have in the city, and I'll pursue David as he escapes Jerusalem. I'll catch him at night, kill him, and it'll be over. Well, the Hushai, the one that David sent as a double agent, he appealed to the vanity of Absalom in 1711. Now, you had to read the whole story, but I was going to read the one verse. He basically said, get a big army from the entire country. It might take months, but get the huge army. And then, therefore, I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea, or multitude, and that you go to battle in person. In other words, think of the vanity now. This guy who has no military experience, he's thinking of himself probably like, well, like we would later think of Alexander the Invincible, probably with a big red cape on, a big plumed hat for the king, you know, gold armor, and here's Absalom leading this vast army. Think of how that appealed to his vanity. There's no way he could avoid it. As a matter of fact, Ahithophel, after he rejected his advice, he went and committed suicide because he knew that when David won, he'd be hung as a traitor. So I might as well do it myself. He knew, even before the battle, that if this man was so dumb not to realize, if you give David time to organize, you've lost. Because David had battle-hardened troops. He was a very experienced. As a matter of fact, it showed the difference between David and his son. As the battle was about to be fought, David's general said, look, you're going to be at your age, and because you're the king, you're the target, you're going to be a liability on the battlefield, just kind of direct it from the rear, and we'll take charge of it. David was modest enough to say, okay, which was, of course, the right thing to do. And I just think it's clear that Hushai knew that appealing to the vanity of Absalom, he rejected that good advice, lost his only chance.
Yeah, so it also shows that if you got to be careful. If your vanity gets the best of you, you can be manipulated real easy by outside influences that are intelligent enough to know that they can use that to play you.
Yep. And Hushai, of course, was doing this for David's sake. You know, and after a few months, David's army and his mighty men rallied around him, and there were some really mighty guys. Even though I think Absalom's army was twice as big, really, when you read the description of what happened, when they were joined in battle, of course, David's men won. It was in the forest of Ephraim. It said the forest took more casualty than David's men. In other words, that army fled the moment they got in tough combat, and they bunch of killed themselves, knocking over themselves in the trees and the ditches, and it was total panic. And then I think it's ironic. Of course, when Absalom's army is panicking around him, of course, he turns his mule or horse around and retreats too. And a big tree branch is like this, catches his big cone of hair. And that's hard to imagine, but I saw a picture of it in the church magazine years ago. It shows Absalom with his arms flailing, his legs flailing, and he's held up by this branch in the tree that comes like this by his hair. And some wedge in the branch, and he runs right through it, and he can't get loose. And of course, even David didn't want him killed, even after all that. That's how much he loved his son. But his generals knew better, and that was the end of him. But I want to make that point of vanity. By the way, there's one thing I might say about Ahithophel. There may be other reasons that we're not totally sure of as to why he forsook David and went with Absalom. But I'm going to just take a guess as to one of the reasons. Probably right before the coup was set in place, public opinion was clearly for Absalom. He was good looking, probably 35 or 40. David was getting much older. He was charming.
People loved him.
From a political standpoint, the political winds were in Absalom's favor.
He was the Donald Trump of his time.
Well, people vote for without really thinking. They look at, you know, he's good looking. He says things I like to hear. You know, he promises me a chicken in every pot, whatever. And they don't take a look at the plan and say, who is this person? What's behind this? What are they really going to do? What kind of character do they have? There was a time in this country we did. And, you know, earlier you made a joke about lawyers. So a lot of our founders were lawyers, but they were honest lawyers. That's an oxymoron today.
Yeah,
that can't possibly be. You know, they were good, honest men.
Do you remember,
Yep.
this is a true statement, and by the way, I'm not being overly judgmental. Anybody can screw up, as we all know. But one of the debates, because Clinton had so many problems, and there's so many Arkansas scandals, this is way back, you might even remember. But I remember hearing political pundits on TV saying, character doesn't really matter in a president. And my eyes like, are you kidding me? Does anybody remember hearing that?
I do.
Yeah.
And I think pretty much that is the mentality of the media, news people today. Character doesn't matter. It's
That's right.
aggressive or not. That's all that matters.
How much can you give me, and what are you going to do for me? Now, they don't care about your character. You know, what are you going to give me, and what are you going to protect for me?
But by the way, now speaking about lawyers, let me just add a little follow-up to James's joke. What do you do if you're locked in a cage with a rat and a snake and a lawyer, and you got one gun with 2 bullets?
Well,
Shoot the lawyer twice.
the snake will eat the rat.
You get rid with the rat, right?
Shoot the lawyer twice.
Well, all I can say is that you could clearly see that his vanity was his destruction. You know, if you go to Matthew 5, Christ said, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I asked the question to myself, just speculating as to why the meek would inherit the earth. Because if I were God, you know, the angels also are free moral agents to some extent, like we are. And they, at least a third of them, followed Satan, and however cleverly Satan seduced them. So if I were God, I would not want vain people in the kingdom living forever.
You know, it says Moses was the most humble man or the meekest man on the earth. And a lot of times when Christ is talking about him in the New Testament or talking about the apostles, he'll say, unless you're like Moses and the apostles or Moses and the prophets, he separates Moses from them because he was the most meek man that had been on the earth. And he was a good man. I mean, he walked and spoke directly with God. Who else can say that?
Mm-hmm.
This whole scenario is kind of a likeness of Satan rebelling because of his vanity to God. Similar thing. Absalom rebelled against his father. So I mean, it's kind of a, you know.
And
then you look at Jesus, who was our example, and he was a very average-looking person. He didn't have long golden hair or striking features. He was just like you and I. It was the only way that he could be humble.
No vanity, no selfishness, no greed. Died for people who did not love him, people who had not been born yet, people who had never seen their face. Offered himself completely, complete opposite of what you see in Absalom.
Absence of vanity.
And I was thinking about what you said, Gary. You know, interesting, they had to pay fairly big money to Judas to point Jesus out in the crowd, and he often got lost from them by getting lost in the crowd. So he had to look average enough, you know, what I call the average working man, Jewish man, so he couldn't have had a big spotlight on his head and a very petulant male model, almost feminine. You know what I'm saying? They could have picked him out. I mean, he's that guy right there. Everybody can see who he. You know what I'm saying?
It would have been easy. The guy carrying the lamb, riding the donkey side saddle with the halo.
Yeah. Exactly. So Christ, and, you know, God could have had Christ come as the most handsome man in the world. He didn't. I mean, he could have if he chose to do it, but he didn't choose to do that. I'm not saying he was bad looking, but he apparently was average enough that you had to point him out of the crowd. I thought one more thing about Ahithophel. Ahithophel probably went with the winds. There may be some other reasons that we could debate, but with the spiritual winds. But what he should have done was asked himself, who has God anointed? I mean, that's what he really. No, it's one thing to go with the popularity contest, but if you lived in those days, the wise people realized that David was anointed by God, and it was better to not go against God's anointed for politics, and that was Ahithophel's mistake.
Well, remember the story of Elijah when they mocked him because he was bald, and bears came out of the woods and mauled them for it. So you're probably smart to leave God's chosen leader alone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that the chosen leaders can't make mistakes or anything of that, because the Bible mentions the mistakes of its heroes as well as their accomplishments. But I think God likes loyalty. There's something to be said for loyalty. If God commissions a leader, I don't know, being loyal, and obviously if the leader goes bad, you know, does a Stanley Raider kind of thing and turns around and goes right back to the world. Well, that's, like I said, the one person, I didn't leave the Worldwide Church of God, the Worldwide Church of God left me. But you know what I mean by loyalty. I think loyalty is a good trait to develop. If you get too vain, you're too vain to be loyal.
Your loyalty turns to yourself.
Yeah, I'm only loyal to me, baby.
Yep.
Well, we probably have covered that, and we have the next commandment on stealing. Is that the one coming up next? I believe that's coming next, stealing.
I believe so.
The eighth commandment. If I'm wrong,
Yeah.
Ken will correct me, right?
Yeah, I think that's correct, yes.
So, on world events, I really don't have a lot, except for one thing that I heard. The stock market lost, at least worldwide, lost maybe more, at $1 trillion plus. A 500-point drop in all the stock markets today. China has had drops in their market. Do you remember I mentioned last week the Chinese government was making rules about stocks that were dropping where they would not allow people to sell them short? And they put in all kind of threatening companies and investors in China. And I said, that is not going to work. When you artificially buoy up the capitalist system, it just blows up at some point. It doesn't work. And China's market dropped a few weeks after that. I'm not saying that's the only reason the world's markets are dropping, but I just want to see what you all think about the significance of this 500-point drop in the stock market.
Well, I mean, I've been hearing a lot about this the world's financial system is really getting long in the tooth right now as far as them being able to prop it up, and that stuff, like, we're going to start seeing things like this could lead to some change in the global, currency. I see there's a headline here. It said today the world's richest people lost $182 billion as the market, dropped. Like you said, 530 points. It's fairly significant. But it's going to take money out of everybody's pocket if stuff like this keeps happening. I mean, 401ks and all this, this stuff just starts, money starts to disappear, and it's going to put a hurt to a whole lot of people.
And remember, our 401ks, if you're thinking about your retirement, is not worth what it was a few days ago.
No, it wasn't, unfortunately.
That's.
Go ahead.
I think the bad thing is if America had kept our budget here. See, like, I give Donald Trump credit for one thing. He's talking about the bad finance. He says at one time he said he might consider paying off the national. He and some other billionaires paid off the national debt. He said it's too big now. It's bigger than our whole economy, or it will be another year or two. I mean, bigger than the size of our gross national product for 1 year. that. See, America could maybe lead the world out of this bad financial whatever it is, but we are saddled. We're not as bad as some places, but we're saddled with too much debt as well. So who can lead the world out of this mess? I don't see any big country that can do it.
I saw. I didn't think it was. I know it was Greece. I think they got a bailout from someone this morning. $14.5 billion. That's nothing, and all they're going to do is continue doing what they're doing until that's going to be right back where they are. You know, it's.
They're just going to. Yeah, they're just going to eat that up. They have no incentive to make cuts and do what they need to do to become a viable, responsible economy because they've been too used to all the freebies.
Like borrowing money to pay your bills.
America's, I'm told this, I heard it last year, 41 cents out of every federal dollar is borrowed. Now, a lot of it's borrowed from the Fed, Federal Reserve, not from China. Some from China, but lots from the. But other central bankers are doing the same thing. They're financing their countries through debt. But a debt finance world system is problematic. That's put in my own. I'm not. Obviously they're experts and they'll all disagree as to what's going to happen. But I've heard at least some people. We have one banker in our church, and she kind of agrees. She's scared that by next year, if these countries don't shape up and really cut back their spending, and Greece has a lot of stuff to do, but there's some other countries in Europe. I didn't actually know this till recently. You know, when back in 2004, 2005, 2006, when America was growing by 4.5%, China was growing by 10%, India by 8 or 9%, and much of the world was really economically booming. Europe was only growing by 1% because they had so much socialism. They had a stagnant economy even then. Well, those countries, except for Germany and a few others, are still too much socialism. They've nationalized too many, because governments cannot run businesses efficiently. They just got too much debt, and they're not running their countries the way it should be run. So Europe is really they're going to be the sick man of the world financially.
Well, Germany, they pay you every time you have children. The average German, I don't know these numbers. I'm working off of memory from a couple of years ago, but the average German has like 1 or 2 kids, and the average foreigner moving into the country has 7 or 8 kids, and the Germans are upset about that. So they're having their own turmoil there as well about foreigners moving in and just making baby, and they keep getting these handout.
We had a student here, because this is a Germanic part of Missouri where a lot of the people were German settlers. So there's a student here, she has a German last name, and she went to Germany, speaks German, married a German young man. They paid her money to have the baby and told her if she went back to Germany, they'd pay her some more money. They want more Germanic babies. But if you're going to say, how does all this fit into prophecy? Maybe we don't know exactly. But the church has always thought, what will bring about the 10 kings and the great dictatorship that's the king of the north? It'll be probably like it was in World War II. In World War II, the Nazi party was small potatoes until the Great Depression. Germany had the worst of it because of reparation payments, the Weimar Republic printing the mark like it was nothing but paper, and all those things. Basically, after that hit, the German people were willing to go for a desperate. And I think even in America, maybe we're looking at politicians we wouldn't have looked at a few years ago because maybe some of our voters feel desperate too. Maybe not quite the same, but.
What happened to Germany is probably going to be what happens to the world as far as why they accepted the leader that they did, especially Europe. I mean, right now we've got Russia, bailing out. They're going to Syria to try to help Assad. We've got Saudi Arabia teaming up with Israel against the whole Middle East, and that whole European bloc is a complete mess. It's a complete mess.
Russia's teaming up with Iran.
Yeah, and Iran. They're actually teaming up with Syria against Iran's led they're backing this ISIS and stuff, and they're kind of on both sides of this game. It's crazy. The whole thing's a mess. It's a complete mess.
Also, I think Saudi
We're not
Arabia
helping
is
matters. We're actually hurting matters.
pulling oil prices down because they're pumping more. Normally, they would do the opposite to try to drive oil prices up because they know it hurts the Russian economy and the Iranian economy, which are oil-based. And they want to hurt the U.S. oil industry too, of course. But I really think that they're using oil as a weapon, but it is hurting countries like Russia. And that only makes them more dangerous.
Right, and then you take that, you take all the wars and rumors of wars that are going on all over the Middle East. I mean, and even in Asia with North Korea, South Korea firing rounds at each other, China building their building islands, fake islands out in the man-made islands out in the middle of the ocean to try and get closer to, they want to take what's that little island they want back? I can't remember the name of it, but
Taiwan, yeah, Taiwan, right?
Taiwan, they want to get Taiwan back. I mean, it's just a complete mess. You pair that with a global economic crisis, which could be coming, based on just some of the stuff we're seeing and all the debt the world is in. That could be the catalyst that could cause the world to, and considering that if there's a war over there, if that comes soon, where the king of the north pushes in to the king of the south, this whole mess is going to make the world just scream for a leader to bail them out. Get us. We want to eat. When you can't eat and your children are starving, you'll do anything.
And there are three things that we need to fulfill prophecy or set the stage, for the return of Christ. One is a king of the north. Maybe an economic collapse in 2016 could set it up, and the decline of America. Of course, we're not holding things together, which apparently we may not be able to do so in the future. Number two, a king of the south. Well, you can see ISIS and others are fighting to create a caliphate. Somebody is eventually going to win, or some combination thereof, and I'm sure it's going to be evil and all that, and violent and all that. And a temple in Jerusalem. Well, right now, Israel is feeling forsaken by all the world and the U.S. The whole world is turning against Israel. I've heard some more stuff. If you watch Israeli News Now, which is on one of the Christian cable networks, I think it might be Inspiration, but you'll find it if you look for it if you have cable. And it is really depressing, the Israeli news. The world is turning against Israel, including their number one supporter, the U.S. If something bad happens to Israel and they have nobody else to turn to, then they turn to God and build the temple.
I mean, it's amazing how you can see how all this stuff could line up now. I mean, 10 years ago, you just knew it was coming eventually, but you couldn't see it as clear as you can now.
Well, a couple of things we got to look at too is the United States. As we lose our national pride and respect of our founders and things, we're not going to be the powerful nation we were, that we can go out and fight these wars and do things right. And we don't have leadership that has a moral standing in right and wrong. They're going to let these things happen. The DNC, I'm told, I saw something on the news the other day, they're going to have an American flag, a Mexican flag, and the gay rights flag, all the same size up. They're going to have 3 flags at their convention. As you see,
Wow.
Us take our founding fathers' pictures off of our coins, and our money starts to look like monopoly money, we're going to know that our national pride is done and that we're done as a nation.
But the DNC and the 212 booed God.
Yes, they did.
The networks didn't show that to the American people, only on cable, but I saw it of it. I mean, they would take nerve to boo God, but putting God in their platform, they booed, and they look like a bunch of. Oh well, it's quite clear that America pulling away from the world creates this vacuum, and in this vacuum, all these 3 bad things can happen. Like if you go back to 2007, the Iraq War was won. It was pretty quiet. The U.S. had placated, basically the Middle East. Middle East is never perfectly quiet, but America had stabilized things. So that there wasn't much fighting in the Middle East. A little terrorism here and there, but nothing exceptional. Everything was quiet. And then we changed presidents. We withdrew from the Middle East, both morally. We blamed America. I mean, what they call it, the apology speech, but you get the general idea. We created a vacuum in the Middle East, and now all hell's broken loose. And maybe Europe is not a vacuum yet, but I think Germany is building a world-class military, their own words, because they realized after what happened in Ukraine, America's protection promises aren't worth much.
And Israel's not looking to us for any kind of help. I heard some reports that they were told that if they did anything to stop Iran from developing nuclear weaponry, that we would shoot their planes down.
Also, something I just heard the other day, Israel had a secret deal with one of the Central Asian nations like Uzbekistan or that other one, there are 2 or 3 together, that has close proximity airfield-wise to Iran, because it's a long flight from Israel to Iran, but Israel had planes stationed there, secretly of course. America revealed that secret to the world, making it hard for Uzbekistan, an Islamic country, to continue it. And we did it intentionally. And we also revealed that Israel had nuclear weapons, which they could always deny, and then that makes their Arab opponents say, well, if they got it, we can have it. Well, in other words, America's been actively trying to hurt Israel. That's the point I'm making. And all that means is, I think the temple is closer. And a lot of times, the world moves slow, and then suddenly things go real fast. Remember the fall of the Soviet Union? It happened in like 7 weeks. The whole thing collapsed. Yep. Maybe in a few months, we could see the king of the South or the king of the North. Or Israel could build a temple in 6 months. You think that's an impossibility?
No.
No. She's quite capable of doing that.
With modern technology, it took them years. Was it 7 years for Solomon to build his temple? 7 years, something like that. And it was something of that nature.
Yeah, I was just reading that. I don't remember the number, but yeah, and what he accomplished in that 7 years was absolutely amazing.
But with modern technology, I bet they could build it in 6 months. I mean, if the political will was there. Of course, the Arabs would give them fits, but if the Arabs are giving them fits anyway, they might decide to do it. So I'm just saying, next year could be a crucial year financially. At least that's what some of the experts say.
Yep.
I guess we've filled up our hour, haven't we?
I think we did that and then some. So I just want to tell everybody, make sure make sure you go into LULICG if you want to see where the next program coming up, and also scroll down a little bit if you want to get in the chat room. And like you said, next week is the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal, and all the implications of if that was kept, how our world would look and what had. Go ahead.
A lot of people think that's just a simple commandment, just be honest. But actually, there's a lot more to it. Hopefully, we'll get to cover some of that. It's not a simplistic thing. It's just don't steal. I mean, don't think you already know all about it and not watch the program. I think hopefully we'll all learn a lot. It's not as simple as it sounds.
Right.
What's the feast countdown?
Oh, I don't have it on me. I think it's 30. My guess is about 7 days, 36 days, something like that. It's not far off, I know that.
I might be out here on the porch until after feast because Sue Ellen's got 17 totes in her computer.
And you can't get in the house. You're stuck outside right now.
I'm here until those totes leave.
I think, isn't it 3 weeks and a few days to trumpets?
Yes, the 14th is trumpets.
3.5 weeks to trumpets. And that's kind of amazing. I got to get ready. I need to scream.
And you can already feel the temperature change. We had that cold front come through, and it's starting to feel like fall already.
You can smell it.
And season's coming. Well, I'm going to fire off the program, Endro, and we will, I guess we'll do this all next week again. Everybody have a great Sabbath. Enjoy yourself for what's left of it, and may remember, always seek the kingdom first. So let's see if we can get this to work for us this week.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
Good night, everybody. Hey,
Good
and
night.
we're almost up to 10,000 views, so we'll see you next week.